Recently, my children's biological mother re-entered their lives, and now they are calling me names. My husband hasn't supported me, so I am filing for divorce. Me, 30-year-old female, has been married to my husband, 34, for 6 years, and he has twins, a boy and a girl. Both of them are 16 now. When we started dating, got married, we went to family therapy, and I made it clear that I was not trying to be their mother or replace their mother. Their mother hasn't been in their life since they were about 8. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm for me and my family. 6 years of marriage blended seamlessly with my husband's twins. We'd navigated the complexities of step-parenting, finding our own unique groove in the family dynamic. They even started calling me mom when they were around 12. When their biological mother vanished from their lives 8 years prior, I never imagined she would resurface, nor did I anticipate the whirlwind of emotions that would follow. Recently their bio mother came back into their lives and they were really excited. Things were great for about 6 months, and then they started to call me by my real name. That hurt, but it's what they chose to do and I never questioned it. Their excitement at reconnecting with their biological mother was palpable, radiating through the walls of our home. I watched them eagerly await her arrival, their anticipation tinged with a longing that I couldn't quite understand. For 6 months, everything seemed harmonious. They showered her with affection, catching up on lost time and building bridges that had been left in ruins for years. But with her return came a subtle shift, a fissure in the foundation of our family unit. Their once frequent use of the word mom to address me dwindled, replaced with the stark reality of my given name. Each time they uttered it, it felt like a tiny dagger, piercing the carefully constructed facade of familial bonds. I grappled with the hurt, swallowing it down with a forced smile, unwilling to let them see the cracks forming within me. They had a right to reconnect with their biological mother. Yet, the ache of being relegated to my given name echoed in the hollow chambers of my heart. I never questioned their choice, never demanded an explanation for the sudden shift in our dynamic. Instead, I buried my pain. Recently they've been getting very disrespectful. The twins, once the embodiment of innocence and joy, have become agents of chaos. It began subtly, like a whisper on the wind, barely perceptible but impossible to ignore. They chafed against the confines of our household rules, pushing back against the boundaries that had once kept our family unit intact. Curfew became a mere suggestion, a trivial inconvenience to be disregarded at will. Their bedrooms transformed into veritable war zones, strewn with the detritus of their adolescent rebellion, a silent protest against the order I had fought so hard to maintain. But it was their words that cut the deepest, each barb a venomous arrow aimed squarely at my heart. "You're not our real mom," they spat, the words dripping with contempt. I recoiled at the accusation, the weight of their words crushing me beneath their burden. How could they not see the love I had poured into their lives, the sacrifices I had made in the name of family? They're talking back to me, stating that I'm not their real mom, that I'm the reason she left. Which is not true. I didn't meet him until almost a year and a half after she left. That now that she's back they don't need me anymore. 3 weeks ago there was a big blow-up where my stepson called me a bitch. I felt the blood drain from my face, my heart pounding in my chest as I struggled to comprehend the magnitude of his betrayal. In that moment, all sense of reason fled. I snatched his phone from his trembling hands, my fingers trembling with a mixture of rage, and told him to stay in his room until his dad came back, but instead he ran out and went to his mom's. She came over and it was a big argument. She tried to hit me and I pushed her out of my house. My stepdaughter told me if I ever put my hands on her mom again then she'd kick my ass. They both went to their mom's place. In the quiet aftermath of the storm that had torn through the fabric of our once happy home, the memories of happier days lingered like a bittersweet ache in my heart. I cast my mind back to those moments of joy, the simple pleasures that had bound us together as a family. I remember the laughter that had filled our home on lazy Saturday afternoons, the sound of their voices mingling with mine as we shared stories and dreams over bowls of melting ice cream. It was a ritual, our own little tradition born out of love and shared experiences. We would gather around the kitchen table, our faces sticky with sweet indulgence, as we savored each creamy spoonful, the taste of chocolate and vanilla a comforting reminder of the bond that held us together. And then there were the adventures we had shared, the memories we had made on family vacations to Disney World. I can still feel the warmth of their small hands clasped in mine as we navigated the crowded streets, their eyes wide with wonder at the magic that surrounded us. We would spend hours exploring every nook and cranny of the theme park, their laughter ringing out like music in the air as we rode roller coasters and met our favorite characters. But now, in the aftermath of the storm, those happy days felt like a distant memory, a faded photograph tucked away in the recesses of my mind. The joy that had once filled our home had been replaced by a hollow emptiness, a numb detachment that left me feeling adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Gone were the days of chauffeuring them to their various sports and activities, replaced instead by a sense of resignation that weighed heavily upon my shoulders. I would sit in the driver's seat of the car, the radio playing softly in the background, as I waited for them to emerge from the house. But they never came, their absence a stark reminder of the distance that now separated us. And so, with a heavy heart and weary soul, I made the decision to step back, to allow their mother to take on the responsibilities that I had once shouldered alone. I would no longer wake them up for school or ferry them to their extracurricular activities, instead, leaving them to navigate the complexities of their daily lives without my guiding hand. It was a painful decision, one born out of necessity rather than choice. But in the end, I knew that it was the only way forward, a small step towards reclaiming my own sense of self amidst the chaos that threatened to consume us all. And as I watched them disappear into the distance, their figures fading into the horizon like ghosts in the mist, I knew that it was time to forge a new path forward, one that would lead me back to myself. And then came the bombshell, a revelation that shattered the fragile peace that had settled over our fractured family. We were supposed to go to Disney World for their spring break this week, but I canceled everything. I told them and my husband, and I guess they thought I was bluffing. We were supposed to leave Thursday night, and when I didn't start the usual vacation roundup, they were shocked. They started saying I was jealous that their mom came back in their lives, that I'm a horrible person, I'm selfish. There was some name-calling, and my husband was silent. They hurled insults like daggers, each one finding its mark as they lashed out in their pain and confusion. I asked him if he was going to step in, but his response was cold and indifferent, his words a knife twisted in the wound that was already bleeding. He said I was wrong for canceling. And so I stood alone, a solitary figure amidst the wreckage of our shattered dreams. For in that moment, I realized that I was fighting a battle that could not be won, a war of attrition that had already claimed its casualties. I left and went to stay in a hotel. I knew that I could no longer bear the burden of our fractured family alone. With a heavy heart and weary soul, I made a decision born of necessity, a choice to seek solace in the quiet refuge of a hotel room, far removed from the chaos that had consumed our once happy home. I needed time to heal the wounds that had been inflicted upon my soul, time to find the strength to rebuild the shattered remnants of our fractured family. He has been blowing my phone up asking me to come back, and yesterday he told me that their mother disappeared again. His voice, pleading and desperate, pierced the silence like a knife, its sharp edges cutting through the numbness that had settled over me like a shroud. He spoke of their tears, of their cries for forgiveness that fell upon deaf ears in my absence. They too have been calling me, crying and apologizing. In their moment of desperation, they had turned to me, seeking redemption in the arms of the woman who had loved them unconditionally, despite the wounds they had inflicted upon her heart. But, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't feel like I'm part of their family, and they can't just cry and come back now that she disappeared. The love that had once bound us together as a family had been replaced by a sense of resignation, a recognition that our paths had diverged in ways we could never have anticipated. And so, with a heavy heart and tear-streaked cheeks, I spoke the words that would irrevocably alter the course of our lives. I want a divorce, I said. My voice barely above a whisper, as the weight of my decision settled like a stone in the pit of my stomach. I watched as my husband's expression shifted from shock to resignation, his eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored my own. And as I turned to leave, the silence of the empty room echoing in my ears, I knew that there was nothing left to say. In the stillness of the night, as the city outside my window lay shrouded in darkness, I found myself grappling with the weight of my own emotions, the turmoil of my thoughts threatening to overwhelm me. Yes, I knew their mother was manipulating them, twisting their fragile emotions, like a puppeteer pulling the strings of marionettes. I never said otherwise, but even with this knowledge, the sting of their betrayal cut deep, a wound that refused to heal no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. Yes, they are 16 years old. An age teetering on the precipice between childhood and adulthood, but even in their youth they don't have the right to treat me this way. Being 16 doesn't mean you get to be disrespectful and threaten me. Despite the venom that dripped from their lips, I have always been in their corner. I had opened my heart to them, embracing them as my own flesh and blood, despite the absence of a biological connection. I know their feelings matter in this, but I am a person too with feelings that ran just as deep as theirs. And as I stood alone in the darkness, I realized that it was time to reclaim my own voice, to assert my own worth in a world that had seemed determined to diminish it. I am not only considering or moving forward with this divorce. The child acts only took a small part in my consideration, the rest are due to the fact that my husband did not back me up in this. I had always believed that marriage was a partnership, a sacred bond forged in love and mutual respect. But as I watched him stand idly by, his silence a damning indictment of his loyalty, I couldn't help but wonder if our union had been built on shaky ground from the start and that he had never loved me. The realization cuts deep, If I can't count on him to help me navigate this tough situation that we were all going through, then why should I stay? That does not mean that I should be treated the way I was being treated. That is not normal 16-year-old behavior. To threaten me? Call me vile names? I just need time for myself. And yet, even as I acknowledge my own flaws, I cannot shake the feeling of betrayal that lingers like a bitter taste upon my tongue. To be threatened and insulted by those whom I had loved and cared for as my own, it cuts me to the core. A wound that refuses to heal no matter how hard I try to ignore it. And I don't want an apology just because their bio mother ran out on them again. Yes, their mother's sudden disappearance had reignited old wounds, dredging up memories of past betrayals and broken promises. But even as I struggle to make sense of the chaos that surrounds me, I want an apology because they really mean it, and I don't believe anyone can be truly sorry 2 days after their mother vanished again. I do not doubt the sincerity of their words, nor do I question the depth of their pain. But forgiveness cannot be rushed, nor can it be won through empty gestures and half-hearted apologies. I need more than words to heal the wounds that have been inflicted upon my soul, more than empty promises to mend the shattered remnants of our fractured family. I would never just abandon them. But I do need time for myself because my feelings were disregarded. But I am not selfish for needing time for myself, for acknowledging the depth of my own pain amidst the chaos that threatens to consume us all. Yes, I am an adult, but I am also human, with feelings that run just as deep as theirs. And in this moment of vulnerability, I realize that I cannot be the pillar of strength that they so desperately need, not when my own foundation is so fragile and tenuous. As I sit in the dimly lit hotel room, the gentle hum of the air conditioner providing a soothing backdrop to the cacophony of thoughts that swirl within my mind, I find myself grappling with the complexities of human emotion. The events of the past few days weigh heavily on my heart, a burden too heavy to bear alone. I had never asked or expected them to be perfect, for I knew that imperfection was the very essence of humanity. But even in the midst of our flaws and shortcomings, there had always been love, a bond that transcended the trials and tribulations of everyday life. I had never expected them to be the most mature people, but I had hoped that they would at least understand the depth of my pain, the wounds that their words had inflicted upon my soul. They have feelings and so do I. I love them with a fierceness that defies reason. They are my children, my heart and soul woven into the fabric of their being, but this is a very complicated situation. This is not because they called me a bitch. Yes, they called me a bitch. But I have been called worse. I am a woman, strong and resilient in the face of adversity. This is ultimately about my husband not backing me up during this situation, and yes, I am hurt that they called me that I'm allowed to be. It hurts even worse coming from two people who I love dearly and would never hurt or want any harm to come to them. I had always believed that marriage was a partnership, a sacred vow to stand by each other through thick and thin. But as I watch him stand on the sidelines, his silence a painful reminder of his failure to stand up for me, I cannot help but feel a deep sense of betrayal. To all the step-parents navigating the often rocky terrain of blended families, I want to offer a few words of advice from my own perspective. I understand the challenges you face, the emotional roller coaster of loving someone who comes with their own children, and the hurdles you've likely overcome to earn acceptance in their lives. First and foremost, remember that building a family in a blended situation requires teamwork. You and your partner must be on the same page, communicating openly and honestly about your hopes, fears, and expectations. Without this solid foundation of mutual understanding and support, it's easy for resentment and discord to seep in, undermining all the efforts you've made to create a loving and harmonious home. Embrace the unique dynamics of your blended family. Every family is different, and what works for one may not work for another. Be flexible and adaptable, willing to adjust your expectations and approach as needed to accommodate the needs and preferences of all family members. The key is that you and your partner must work together to build a family. It's the only way for things to work out. Otherwise, all of your efforts and all the love you pour in will be useless. Hello, I have been getting a lot of messages asking for an update. I am now in a place to be able to give an update. You can look at my previous post for what this is about. I went back to the house 2 days ago. My husband and I had agreed to sit down and have a long overdue conversation about what had transpired, about the cracks that had begun to form in the foundation of our family. As we sat across from each other in the dimly lit living room, the memories of happier days lingered like ghosts in the corners of my mind. I couldn't help but cast my thoughts back to the countless afternoons spent together as a family, the sun-drenched days filled with laughter and love. But now, as I sat across from my husband, the gravity of our situation pressing down upon us like a leaden weight, I knew that we could no longer ignore the cracks that had begun to form in the foundation of our family. We had a long talk about what happened and how I didn't feel protected by him, and how he knew how disrespectful they were being but didn't stop anything. As I sat across from my husband, the weight of his words settling like a leaden weight in the pit of my stomach, I couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief wash over me. He said that he still loved his ex, and that's why, pretty much. He spoke of his lingering feelings for his ex-wife, of the fear that had gripped him in the aftermath of her sudden return to their children's lives. He didn't want to do anything for her to leave them again, them as in him and the twins, but that didn't change how he felt about me. I listened in stunned silence, the air heavy with the weight of unspoken truths and unresolved emotions. How could he expect me to believe that his heart still belonged to another, even as he professed his love for me? It was a contradiction that left me reeling, a bitter taste of betrayal that lingered on my tongue. The reality of our situation crashing down around me like a tidal wave, I knew that the happy memories of our past could no longer sustain us. His admission of lingering feelings for his ex-wife was a wound that cut deep, a betrayal that shattered the fragile illusion of our marriage. I told him that I've been there, not her, and how could he still love her, and it was very emotional and there was crying and yelling. I made the decision to move along with the divorce. I spoke to the twins and they cried and said it's their fault and to forgive them and their dad and not to leave. With a heavy heart and a voice thick with emotion, I explained to them that while I still loved them dearly, remaining with their father was not a path I could choose. I reassured them that I would always be there for them, that our bond would endure even in the face of adversity. But I also made it clear that their actions had consequences, that they could not treat people with such disrespect and expect everything to simply return to normal. I told them that as much as I loved them, staying with their dad and in this home was not an option, but I would still love to have a relationship with them if they want, but I am still very much hurt by what happened and would still appreciate a little more time for myself. I did move out and I was staying in a unit in one of my rental properties. Exciting news, I bought my first house. It was a fairly quick process. I'm excited for what's next. I bought my first house ever, and next month I am taking a break from work for a few weeks or the whole month. Maybe 2 or 3, and doing some exploring of the world and healing and finding myself. I lost myself in the twins and my husband and didn't really focus on what I wanted and what made me happy. So I bought tickets again for Disney World. I have also made plans to go to Thailand next month, and from there, I have no clue. I'm doing some spontaneous trips. I have always wanted to see the 7 wonders of the world. Anyway, I am really happy to be getting a break. I told the kids I would love to have them over for dinner when I get settled into my new place. I do feel bad about canceling their trip to Disney, so I am thinking about funding a trip for them to go this summer for their 17th birthday. Just not with me. I'm excited to be traveling alone and I need the mental break. That is all really. I stopped being physically intimate with my husband because our connection faded. His constant grumpiness and unkindness toward me and the kids have made our home cold, and despite my wishes, it seems we're heading toward divorce. I stopped being physically intimate with my husband 7 months ago. Why? The comments on your thread basically said why. I didn't feel connected to him anymore. When I reflect on the early days of our marriage, there was a lightness between us, an easiness that seemed to permeate days and fill our home with laughter. We used to communicate with a look, understand each other's silence, and cherish the moments caught between the demands of daily life. He was my confidant, the person who made me feel seen and cherished. I remember the way he used to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear, or how his hand would find mine across the crowded spaces of our lives. Those gestures, seemingly insignificant, held the weight of promises and the warmth of enduring love. Then, gradually, the atmosphere shifted. The buoyancy that had defined our relationship began to dissipate, replaced by a heaviness that neither of us could clearly identify at first. After we had kids, those signs of affection went 100% to his children. However, it wasn't just about the kids, though their arrival certainly reshaped our world in profound ways. It was something deeper, a fundamental change in how he saw me, or perhaps, in how he chose to express his feelings. I became an afterthought. Worse actually, I became an annoyance. At first, the change was slight. His smiles perfunctory and his once frequent caresses had become rare. Every time I walked into the room, the light in his eyes seemed to go out, as though I were a burden rather than a blessing. It was a silent anguish that intensified with every apathetic look and harsh comment, hurting in ways I was unable to put into words. Our conversations, once filled with shared dreams and playful banter, became logistical exchanges primarily focused on the kids or household duties. I tried to bridge the widening gap, reaching out with tentative words of affection, or attempting to initiate the kind of spontaneous intimacy that had once come so naturally to us. Each effort seemed to meet with a wall of indifference or, worse, irritation. The more I pressed, the more he withdrew, until the distance between us felt insurmountable. I could never do anything right. I was by his words, always forgetting, and lazy, for small things, such as forgetting to put leftovers in the fridge. The man who used to light up my world now cast long shadows over our home. His frustration seemed to simmer just below the surface, erupting over trivialities. He criticized more than he complimented, and what was once playful teasing now felt like pointed jabs. I recall one really depressing night. The kids had been particularly rowdy, and I had spent hours trying to settle them into bed. I entered the kitchen, exhausted, and saw him glaring icily at the shambles that had been left on the counter. He angrily asked, "Can't you just clean up after yourself?" It felt colder here than it had outside that night. His words stung, not because of their severity, but because of what they represented. A deepening void filled with resentment and misunderstanding. I looked at him, really looked, and saw a stranger where my husband used to be. The air in our house grew thick with unspoken resentments, and as much as I tried to penetrate the silence, my efforts seemed to only drive us further apart. His moods became a barometer for our daily life, unpredictable and often stormy. His words hurt, but more than his words did when he was grouchy, which was most of the time these days. There was an underlying coldness about him that permeated every part of our house. So obviously over time, I don't really feel safe with him, or even enjoy hanging out with him. The irony is that I love him so much that I want to be physically intimate with him because he's great in bed and selfless. But I just don't desire him. He's not kind to me or the kids when he's grumpy, which is most of the time. I tried to explain, to tell him how much I missed him, how much I missed us. "We could have a perfect life," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just be happy, enjoy us. That's all I want. Kind words, no criticism, small touches. We'd be having so much sex." But nah, that's too hard. What he's decided to do is withdraw. Give up. Marriage light, he calls it. No talking. No interaction. If he doesn't get sex, he's going to just do the bare minimum, for the family. Because sex comes first, then he'll be nice. Smart guy, but he's literally doing the opposite and saying that's the solution to his lack of sex problem. With a look of discouragement or even contempt, he shook his head. He turned his back on me and whispered, "It's not that simple." And it was then that I understood that the everyday affirmations of love and respect that had been steadily eroding were the answer, something he either failed to perceive or was unable to understand. Even though I don't want a divorce, it's clear that we are moving toward one. It was clear that we were spiraling toward an end neither of us had envisioned on our wedding day, driven there by lost connections and unmet needs. The irony was that, although we both desired intimacy, we were unable to bridge the widening gap. Update. One evening, as I was setting the table for dinner, our youngest, Mia, accidentally knocked over a glass of water. The sound of shattering glass echoed like a gunshot in the tense air. I held my breath, bracing for his reaction. True to the new norm, he stormed into the kitchen, his face contorted with frustration. "Can't you kids do anything right?" he snapped at her. Mia, only 7, her eyes wide and brimming with tears, recoiled as if the words were physical blows. I rushed to her side, but the damage was done. She was shaking, a small scared shadow of the bubbly child she once was. That night, after I had tucked Mia into bed and soothed her fears, I confronted him. "You can't keep doing this to the kids," I said, my voice firm despite the trembling I felt inside. "They're afraid of you. You're supposed to be their protector, their hero, and you're turning into the monster under their bed." He paused, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of realization in his eyes. But it passed quickly, and he shrugged off my concerns. "They need to learn discipline," he said, his voice devoid of the warmth I once loved. "I'm not going to tiptoe around them." The chasm between us widened with his every dismissive remark. I found myself wondering how the man I had fallen so deeply in love with could now look at me, at his own children, with such indifference and irritation. Our home had become a battlefield, our interactions mined with potential triggers for his temper. The situation escalated one afternoon when I found him berating our son, Lucas, for not finishing his homework. His tone was harsh, his words sharp, and I saw in Lucas the same fear that had gripped Mia. I stepped in, unable to hold back any longer. "Stop it. Just stop," I shouted. "They're just children, you're tearing them apart." He turned on me then, his anger no longer contained. "And what about you?" he retorted. "You're so busy defending them. You don't see the stress I'm under. You don't see me at all." I realized then that this was more than just a rough patch. We were at a breaking point. His unwillingness to seek joy with us, his relentless negativity. It wasn't just pushing me away, it was affecting our children deeply. Each day left emotional scars, and I feared the long-term effects it would have on them. The home that once held laughter and love now felt oppressive, a place where joy was suffocated under the weight of constant criticism and discontent. Edit. I'm not here for advice despite the flair. 20 years is a long time to build a life with someone. It's enough time to knit together countless memories, shared dreams, and intertwined lives. When I met him, I was in my early 20s, and he was everything I thought I wanted: charismatic, confident, with a smile that could light up a room. We fell into love as easily as one might fall into a dream, swept away by the promise of a future together. But dreams, I've learned, don't always hold up in the harsh light of day. As the years passed, the man I married seemed to retreat behind a facade I no longer recognized, replaced by someone whose warmth had cooled, whose kindness had soured into criticism. What had once been a partnership began to feel more like a prolonged battle, with each of us in our respective trenches, no longer fighting together but against one another. In an effort to bridge the gap, I suggested marriage counseling. It was a desperate grasp at what remained of us, a lifeline thrown into the turbulent waters of our failing relationship. Initially, he agreed, albeit reluctantly. But it was short-lived. After only a few sessions, he dismissed the entire endeavor. "There's no point paying someone to tell us what I already know," he said, his voice edged with the kind of defeat that suggested he saw no future in trying. He believed the counselor was just echoing sentiments that were already palpable between us. Undeterred, I scheduled another session. This time, I knew I would likely be going alone. It felt symbolic, this solitary act, a representation of the loneliness that had crept into my marriage, filling up the spaces where laughter and love used to live. Attending the on-demand marriage counseling session alone was a poignant experience. The decision to go by myself was not easy, but necessary. The office was the same, the couch familiar, yet everything felt different. Without him there, the space seemed larger, almost echoing the emptiness I felt. The counselor, a kind and perceptive woman, greeted me with a gentle nod, her eyes reflecting understanding that today was going to be a different kind of session. As I sat down, I felt an odd mix of relief and apprehension. Relief because I could speak freely without worrying about his reactions or the immediate tension his presence often brought. Apprehension, because going alone underscored the seriousness of our disconnection. It was as if his absence in the session mirrored the growing void in our relationship. The session started with the counselor asking simple questions about how I had been feeling. Speaking without him there, I found my words flowed more easily. There was no need to look over, to gauge his reaction or to temper my words to keep the peace. I talked about the loneliness, the sadness of feeling unpartnered in what was supposed to be a lifelong partnership. I shared the yearning for kindness, the need for a space where I wasn't constantly critiqued but understood and accepted. The counselor listened intently, occasionally guiding the conversation deeper into my feelings of disillusionment and loss. She asked about what happiness looked like for me now, in the current context of my life. This question stumped me. I had been so focused on trying to salvage whatever was left of our marriage that I hadn't stopped to consider what my own happiness might look like independently of him. We explored the dynamics that had led to our current state. Discussing these without him there allowed me to be more honest, more forthright about my grievances without fear of escalation. The counselor helped me see how my people-pleasing tendencies might have enabled some of the dynamics that were so painful now. We talked about setting boundaries, about the importance of self-care and self-respect in any relationship. The session came to an end and I felt lighter. It wasn't as though my problems vanished magically, but more like I started to see things clearly. By sharing my fears and worries openly, I felt stronger. Yes, the feeling of being alone was still present, but with it came a newfound courage, realization of my own needs, and the understanding that it's okay to pursue a life that meets those needs. Leaving the counselor's office, I felt a stark contrast to the times I had left it with him by my side. Previously, each session was followed by a silence, sometimes resentful, sometimes exhausted. We would leave together but more divided, each of us retreating into our own corners of pain and misunderstanding. This time, I left feeling a sense of individual purpose. The path forward was not yet clear, but the journey felt like my own. Reflecting on our 2 decades together, I've come to realize that the foundation of our relationship was flawed in ways I hadn't seen, or perhaps hadn't wanted to see. I have always been a people pleaser, a trait that made it easy for me to overlook slights, to forgive without amends, to absorb the brunt of his frustrations without complaint. I thought this was resilience, perhaps even a form of love. But there is only so much one can bear before realizing that what is being carried is not shared weight but a unilateral burden. Now, as I contemplate attending counseling alone, it feels like both an end and a beginning. It's an admission that while I can work on myself, I can't force him to engage with me in this process. The love I have for him persists, a stubborn flame not easily extinguished even by years of hardship. Yet, loving him no longer means sacrificing my own well-being. I've fallen out of love with the man he has become, even as I cling to the memory of the man he once was. The mutual respect, compassion, and kindness I yearn for are fundamental, yet they seem like foreign concepts to him now. My hope for a free space, where mistakes are met with understanding rather than contempt, feels like a modest ask in the grand scheme of a shared life. Yet, it's become a cornerstone of what I need to thrive, not just survive. As I face the possibility of attending counseling alone, it's not just the unraveling of our relationship that occupies my thoughts, but the reconstruction of my own sense of self. It's about reclaiming my right to a life where respect and kindness are not just occasional graces but consistent presences. Whether this path leads to reconciliation or separation remains unclear, but what is certain is my commitment to seeking a better, healthier way forward, for myself, and hopefully, for our children too. I used to be a people pleaser, but then I've realized life is short and I deserve a free space to make mistakes and do my own thing. My boyfriend of 4 months retaliated against me because I went out with my close friends until morning by calling me while he was having sex with his friends with benefits. Time has a tendency to curve around our feelings. Even though Brandon and I have only been dating for 4 months, the spectrum of emotions we have shared makes our time together feel both very short and shockingly lengthy. He studies architecture, while I study graphic design at VL University. We are both sophomores. Due to our mutual passion for design, we initially met in a freshman seminar. From the beginning, our talks were smooth and conversational, discussing our studies and aspirations for the future. We would frequently have coffee while surrounded by class models and sketches. In those early days, our relationship felt natural and easy. We spent many nights discussing our projects and ideas, which I always found enriching. Brandon's background was quite different from mine, particularly his strong Catholic faith and conservative views, which initially I found intriguing. He was upfront about his past and his values, including his limited experience with relationships, and his decision to mostly save himself for marriage. However, as we moved past the honeymoon phase of our relationship, I began to feel the weight of our differences more acutely. His traditional views, which I once admired, started to feel restrictive, especially around topics of intimacy and personal freedom. He had been very open about his conservative approach to relationships, but this openness sometimes made me uncomfortable and skeptical about how it would affect our relationship. Our first major challenge came when I committed to a major group project with my friends from the graphic design program. The project, named 50 Specimen Shapes, was an ambitious plan to create 3D models for various abstract shapes, combining artistic flair with scientific precision. As the deadline approached, my team decided to pull an all-nighter to finish our work. I was excited about the project and shared my plans with Brandon, hoping he would understand the commitment it required. Instead, his response was cooler than expected. He seemed uneasy, not just about the late night, but also about me being deeply involved in something outside of our relationship. His discomfort seemed to stem from his religious beliefs, which made him wary of the unpredictable nature of creative projects. His reaction left a coldness between us as I prepared for the night. There was a noticeable tension in his goodbye that evening, and even his hug felt forced. It made me wonder if our relationship, built on such different foundations, could really last. Despite this, I headed into the project night full of anticipation, but also concern, not realizing that the events of the evening would test our relationship even further. The day leading up to the planned all-nighter with my friends was a typical Thursday, marked by the usual rush of classes and the added buzz of creative energy that always seemed to spike as deadlines approached. I had spent most of the afternoon in the studio, putting the finishing touches on my part of the project, my mind racing with adjustments and improvements. The vibrant atmosphere was contagious, everyone throwing ideas back and forth, our workspace a testament to weeks of hard work and chaotic creativity. I checked my phone intermittently, noting the absence of any messages from Brandon. It was unusual, given that we often exchanged quick updates or words of encouragement throughout the day. Deciding to break the silence, I sent him a text, hoping to lighten his mood and possibly share some of my excitement. "Hey, busy day here but looking forward to tonight. Wish me luck," I typed, hoping the smiley face would bring a smile to his too. The reply came just as I was gathering my things to leave the studio for a quick dinner before the evening's marathon. "Good luck. We need to talk when you have a moment," the message read, void of any emojis that might hint at his mood. The brevity and tone of his text sent a small wave of anxiety through me. It was not what I had hoped to read, especially not today. Dinner was a rushed affair at a nearby cafe, where I sat alone with a sandwich and a cup of too strong coffee, mulling over Brandon's message. The cafe was cozy, a little nook that served as a frequent escape for me from the campus hustle. Today, however, the warmth of the cafe did little to ease the chill that had settled inside me. Returning to my apartment briefly, I found Brandon waiting for me, his figure slouched against the doorway of our small shared living room, an unmistakable tension in his posture. As I stepped inside, the look on his face was serious, more somber than I had seen in days. "Hey, you're home early," I said, trying to sound cheerful. Brandon just nodded, his eyes following me as I dropped my bag and took off my coat. "We need to talk about this project night of yours," he began, his voice steady but with an edge that immediately put me on guard. "I don't understand why you need to spend a whole night working on this with your friends. Doesn't seem like it's just about the project." His words stung, more so because they echoed a deeper distrust that seemed to have been growing between us. "It's just a project, Brandon. It's important for my course, and you know how these things go. We all push at the end to get everything perfect," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. Brandon crossed his arms, his brow furrowing slightly. "It's always about the project, isn't it? Or something else? I feel like you're slipping away, doing all these things without me. And tonight, it just feels like you don't want me around." I sighed, feeling the weight of his words and the widening gap they represented. "This isn't about not wanting you around, Brandon. This is about me needing to do this for my degree. For me. I thought you understood that." He looked away, the lines of his face hardening. "I do. It's just hard sometimes. I miss how it used to be with us." There was a sadness in his voice that pulled at me, a reminder of simpler times when our biggest concerns revolved around which movie to watch or what dessert to share on a Saturday night. Now, standing in the dim light of our living room, those days felt like distant echoes overshadowed by the growing complexities of our relationship. "I miss that too," I admitted softly, the distance between us feeling more profound in the silence that followed. Dinner ended with an uneasy truce, the issue temporarily set aside but the tension lingering like a stubborn fog. As I grabbed my things to head out, Brandon's voice stopped me at the door. "Be safe, okay?" he said, a trace of the old warmth in his voice that made my heart ache for what we were struggling to hold on to. "I will. I promise," I responded, offering him a small hopeful smile before stepping out into the cool evening air. The night's possibilities stretched out before me like the sprawling campus pathways. The excitement for the project was still there, but now it was tinged with a poignant mixture of concern and longing for the relationship I was still learning to navigate. The night of the project was set to be intense, a blend of creativity and chaos as we worked against the clock. My friends and I had booked a study room in the university's main library, a space often reserved for late-night cram sessions and collaborative projects. As I arrived around 8 p.m., the familiar sense of excitement and nervous energy filled the air, palpable among the scattered laptops, strewn papers, and 3D materials that covered the tables. The first few hours flew by as we dove into our tasks. Anna, a meticulous planner, coordinated our efforts, ensuring everyone stayed on track with their assigned elements. John, ever the perfectionist, was immersed in adjusting the lighting on our 3D models, creating the perfect shadows that made our shapes seem almost lifelike. My role was to integrate the background graphics I had designed, ensuring they complemented rather than overwhelmed the models. At 10 p.m. I sent a quick message to Brandon. "In full swing here. Hope your evening is relaxing." The immediate response I hoped for didn't come, and I pushed the slight worry away, redirecting my focus to the vibrant discussion on color schemes and textures swirling around me. Midnight approached, and we took a brief coffee break. The library's 24-hour cafe was buzzing with other students similarly burning the midnight oil, and the air was thick with the aroma of espresso and the low hum of hushed conversations. I checked my phone again, noting the absence of any message from Brandon. A ripple of concern stirred within me, but I was quickly pulled back into the lively banter of my friends, discussing the latest episode of a popular design reality show. By 2 a.m. the project was shaping up, but the fatigue was setting in. We powered through with energy drinks and the collective adrenaline that comes from nearing the finish line. I sent another message to Brandon, a bit more detailed this time. "Still working hard. Miss you." The read receipt popped up almost immediately, but there was no reply. The silence gnawed at me, making the coffee seem a bit more bitter. As 4 a.m. rolled around, we were in the final stretch, adding the last touches to our project. The room was quieter now, the earlier excitement giving way to focused concentration and the occasional yawn. I sent one last update to Brandon, half hoping he'd respond with words of encouragement or at least acknowledge my efforts. "Almost done here. Can't wait for you to see the final product. Love you." The lack of response this time felt heavier, more loaded. I stared at the screen for a moment longer than necessary, the glow highlighting the worry lines that had formed between my brows. Finally, around 5:30 a.m., we wrapped up. Our project, a visually stunning presentation of geometric and organic shapes, stood as a testament to our hard work and collaborative spirit. There was a collective sigh of relief mixed with pride as we packed up our things. Despite the successful conclusion, my heart wasn't fully in the celebration. The unanswered messages from Brandon cast a shadow over my mood. I arrived home just as the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The apartment was silent, Brandon's side of the bed untouched, indicating he hadn't slept. On the kitchen counter, I found a note from him. Went out to clear my head. We'll talk when I get back. The terse note was unlike his usual thoughtful messages and did little to ease the knot of anxiety that had tightened in my stomach over the course of the night. The words, so stark and devoid of his usual warmth, felt like a cold draft through the room. It was not like him to leave such a terse message. Sitting at the edge of our bed, I felt the weight of the night's efforts on my shoulders and the heavier burden of an unresolved conflict waiting in the wings. The joy of our project's completion was tinged with a sadness that felt all too familiar lately. A reminder of how distant Brandon and I had become in such a short span of time. As I awaited his return, the excitement of the night faded into the background, overshadowed by the uncertainty of the conversation that awaited us. Brandon returned home late in the noon, the sound of the front door closing a signal that a confrontation was imminent. I could hear the muffled sounds of his movements as he hung up his coat and placed his keys in the dish by the entrance, each noise echoing slightly in the tense silence of our apartment. The atmosphere was charged, heavy with the anticipation of the difficult conversation that lay ahead. He found me in the living room, where I had been staring out the window at the cityscape, lost in thought and dreading his return. As he entered, his expression was unreadable, a mask that hid whatever emotions he had stewed in during his hours away. He paused at the doorway, his posture rigid, and then slowly approached where I sat. "So, you were out all night for a project?" His tone was skeptical, laced with a bitterness that made me wince. The question felt like an accusation, a prelude to an argument I wasn't ready to have but knew was unavoidable. "Yes, Brandon, it was for my final project. You know how important this is for my grade," I responded, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fatigue and emotional strain. I didn't want to be out so late either, but we had to get everything finished. It's not something I can just put off. Brandon scoffed, shaking his head as he paced a few steps before turning to face me again. "All night, though? Seems like a bit much for just a project. You could have done some of it at home, couldn't you? Why did it have to be an all-nighter?" His doubt stung, and I could feel the defensive walls building up inside me. It wasn't just me, the whole group was there. We needed to work together to get it all done. It's not something I can control. Everyone was counting on each other. He continued to look unconvinced, his arms folded across his chest as he leaned back slightly against the wall. "It just doesn't sit right with me, you being out like that and not even a call to check in. How am I supposed to trust that?" The room seemed smaller with each word, the air between us thick with unsaid things and pent-up frustrations. I was so tired from this, so exhausted from the project and the sleepless night. "I'm telling you the truth, Brandon. I'm too busy to call. But I've texted a lot but you haven't replied." Brandon's gaze hardened, and he let out a long sigh, a sound of frustration and disbelief mixed together. "I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. Something about this doesn't add up." The conversation spiraled from there, with each of us rehashing old grievances and misunderstandings, our voices rising and falling in a familiar dance of conflict. Despite my attempts to explain the necessity of the night out, Brandon remained skeptical, his trust seemingly eroded by the incident. As the discussion wore on, I felt a profound exhaustion wash over me, not just from the lack of sleep but from the constant battle to justify my actions and intentions. It was draining, this feeling of having to defend my commitment to both my education and our relationship, and as the afternoon light began to fade, so too did my resolve to keep arguing. Finally, I stood up, a gesture that paused our heated exchange. "I need some rest, Brandon," I said quietly, the fight gone from my voice. "I'm sorry you feel this way, but I've told you the truth. I hope you can believe me." Without waiting for his response, I turned and headed towards our bedroom, leaving Brandon in the living room, surrounded by the silence that quickly filled the space I had vacated. The unresolved tensions remained, a silent specter in our home, as I closed the bedroom door behind me, seeking a refuge from the turmoil and a few hours of much-needed sleep. As the gentle colors of the morning light pierced the darkness, I looked forward to a peaceful morning to relax after the strenuous project session. However, the sudden ringing of my phone shattered the quiet of our apartment, catching me off guard. It was Brandon. Considering the time and the tense messages we had exchanged earlier, I prepared myself for a challenging conversation, but I was still utterly unprepared for the events that were about to unfold. As the soft hues of dawn broke through the night, I anticipated a quiet morning to unwind after the intense project session. However, my phone's sharp ring cut through the stillness of our apartment, startling me. It was Brandon. Given the hour and the strained messages from earlier, I braced myself for a difficult conversation, but nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen. "Hello?" My voice was groggy, tinged with sleep and anxiety. The sounds that met my ears were not words but moans, distinct, Unmistakable sounds of intimacy. My mind raced as I tried to process the audio assault. Confusion gave way to a horrifying realization as Brandon's voice came through the line, breathy and cruel. "I wanted you to hear what you've been missing," he said, a hard edge to his whispered words. The background noise didn't subside. It was clear he was not alone. The shock hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. My hand trembled as I held the phone, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger, hurt, and disbelief. How could the man I loved subject me to such a deliberate act of humiliation and spite? There was a pause, a soft shuffle, then Brandon's voice again, colder this time. "Because maybe now you'll understand how it feels to be unwanted," he said, before the line went dead. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering against the hardwood floor. I stood frozen, the echo of his words reverberating in my mind, each syllable a shard of glass in my heart. The pain was sharp and deep, a betrayal that cut to the core of my being. Tears spilled over, hot and unchecked, as I sank to the floor. The room spun around me, a whirl of dark thoughts and unanswered questions. Who was the woman he was with? But more than anything, why would he choose such a devastating way to express his pain? In my shock, I called Anna immediately. She came to my apartment and rushed into the room. She was by my side, her hands gently lifting my chin to meet her worried gaze. "What happened? Oh my God, are you okay?" Her voice was laced with concern, her eyes searching mine for an explanation. I shook my head, the words catching in my throat. Through sobs, I recounted the phone call, each word punctuated by a fresh wave of tears. Anna listened in silence, her arm wrapping around my shoulders in a comforting embrace. "This isn't just about tonight, is it?" she murmured after I had finished, her voice soft but steady. "There's more going on here, more pain than just this moment." She was right. The incident wasn't an isolated one but a climax of ongoing tensions and unspoken grievances that had been building between Brandon and me. It was the breaking point of something that had been fracturing slowly, painfully, over time. Anna stayed with me as dawn turned to day, offering silent support as I processed the initial shock, and began to consider the implications of what had happened. The reality of the situation was harsh. Not only had Brandon violated our trust in the most intimate way, but he had also used his actions as a weapon, a way to hurt me as deeply as he felt hurt. "We need to talk about this, not just you and me, but you and him," Anna finally said, her tone firm. "This can't be brushed under the rug, it's too big, too painful." She was right. As much as I dreaded the confrontation, I knew it was necessary. The foundation of our relationship had been shaken, perhaps irrevocably, and it was clear that things could not continue as they had been. With Anna's encouragement, I found the strength to call Brandon later that day. My voice was steadier than I felt, bolstered by the conviction that I deserved better than the cruelty he had shown. "Brandon, we need to talk," I started, my words clear despite the tremor of emotion that underlaid them. "What you did this morning was beyond hurtful. It was destructive." There was a heavy silence on the other end before Brandon responded. His voice was subdued, lacking the harshness of earlier. "I know," he admitted, and for a moment, I thought I heard a hint of regret from him. I was angry, hurt. I had no idea how else to show, so I did that. "Brandon, hurting me like that, making me listen while you were with someone else. That's not a way to solve anything. It's just causing more pain," I continued, my voice firm but shaking with the weight of my emotions. "I know," he repeated, his voice low. "I wasn't thinking, I just felt so disconnected from you, and I don't know what I thought. I'm sorry, truly." His apology was a start, but the road to healing seemed long and fraught with potential setbacks. The trust between us had been deeply damaged, and I was unsure if it could ever fully be restored. After the phone call with Brandon, I retreated to the safety of our bedroom. The four walls felt like a sanctuary from the chaos and emotional turmoil that had erupted in our living room. Lying on our bed, I couldn't shake off the deep-seated sadness that clung to me, nor the images of Brandon's face, twisted with accusation and mistrust. My mind spun in circles, reflecting on the spiraling decline of our relationship. It was a cycle, tension, and misunderstanding that seemed to repeat itself with increasing intensity. I thought back to the early days with Brandon, when each moment together was filled with laughter and spontaneity. Those memories now seemed like echoes of a distant past, a stark contrast to our current reality where smiles were rare and silences were loaded with unsaid grievances. It wasn't just the lack of trust or the painful confrontation that morning. It was the realization that I no longer recognized the man I had fallen in love with. He had become a stranger, one who could willingly inflict pain with such calculated indifference. As I lay there, a mix of exhaustion and despair washing over me, My phone buzzed with incoming messages. Reluctantly, I reached over to check it, finding texts from Anna and a missed call from my sister Leah. I dialed Leah back, needing the familiar comfort of her voice. "Hey Leah," I began, my voice cracking slightly. "Hey, what's wrong?" "I could sense something was off from your text," she responded, her tone immediately shifting to one of concern. I recounted the morning's events, the call from Brandon, and the painful words exchanged. Leah listened silently, only interjecting to ask clarifying questions. When I finished, there was a heavy pause. "That's just cruel, you know? It's not like you to tolerate this kind of behavior, not from anyone," Leah finally said. Her words, firm and straightforward, mirrored my own thoughts. It was a reflection of how far I had strayed from the person I used to be, someone who valued self-respect and mutual understanding above all in a relationship. "Yeah, I know. I don't even know who he was anymore," I admitted, feeling the weight of my own words. "I can't keep going like this. It's draining me, Leah. It's not healthy." "You deserve so much better," Leah replied, her voice soft yet insistent. "You need to think about what you really want moving forward, not just for the sake of the relationship, but for yourself." Her words sparked something within me, a flicker of determination amidst the confusion. It was a call to reclaim the parts of myself that I had neglected in my attempts to salvage our faltering relationship. I needed to reflect on what I truly wanted, not just drift along in the current of Brandon's moods and accusations. Later that day, I met with Anna for coffee. As always, she was a grounding presence, someone who could always cut through the noise and help me see things more clearly. As I sipped my coffee, Anna laid it out plainly. "Everyone sees it, you know. You're not yourself anymore. You're always tense, always worrying about how to navigate around Brandon's feelings. When's the last time you did something just for yourself? Something that made you happy?" Her question hung in the air, stark and challenging. I didn't have an answer, and that in itself was telling. "He's changed, Anna. Or maybe I'm just seeing the side of him he's hidden all this time," I said, the realization bitter. "Maybe," Anna agreed, her brow furrowed in thought. "But more importantly, what are you going to do about it?" That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do? The thought of continuing in a relationship where I felt so undervalued, so misunderstood, was unbearable. Yet the thought of ending things, of stepping into the unknown after all we had shared, was daunting. Over the next few days, I took time to myself, reflecting on my values, my needs, and my future. I thought about the kind of love I wanted. The kind that was nurturing, respectful, and joyful. It was clear that what Brandon and I had now was far from those ideals. The love had been overshadowed by resentment and pain, a far cry from the partnership I envisioned. I realized that moving forward alone was a better path than staying in a relationship that had lost its way. It wasn't just about finding happiness but about preserving my self-respect and rediscovering the strength I had before the relationship consumed me. With a heavy heart but a clear mind, I decided it was time to end the relationship with Brandon. I needed to express my decision, not out of spite or anger, but from a place of honesty and self-respect. I hoped that he would release me, that he could see the necessity of the choice I was making. The decision to end our relationship was not easy, but it was necessary. It was a step towards healing, towards reclaiming the joy and peace that had once defined my life. As I prepared to have that final conversation with Brandon, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for all that we had lost, and relief that I was finally taking a step towards a future where I could be myself again, free from the shadows that our love had become. With Brandon, the conclusion was just as challenging as I had expected. But beneath all the pain, there was a resolve that persisted. I was clear in expressing my demands and the sadness of a relationship that had deviated too much from happiness and respect for one another. As he listened, Brandon's expressions were a mixture of resignation and quiet recognition. Ultimately, he comprehended and acknowledged my choice, even though it was evident he was upset and regretful. In the weeks that followed, the immediate sense of relief I felt was tinged with moments of profound loneliness. Our shared apartment, once alive with shared dreams, now echoed with the quietness of solitude. I spent long evenings reflecting on what had gone wrong, turning over the memories, both sweet and bitter. This introspection, though painful, was a necessary part of my healing process. Gradually, the sharpness of recent wounds gave way to a more profound understanding of myself and my boundaries. I began to reconnect with old friends, and my family. Relationships that had been somewhat neglected, became sources of comfort and joy. Their support was instrumental in rebuilding the sense of self that had been eroded in my efforts to save a failing relationship. The knowledge I gained from this period of my life was priceless but difficult to get. I came to understand the value of being honest and open with myself as well as with a partner. I realized the danger of compromising too much and losing oneself in the attempt to keep others happy. I made a self-promise to put emotional fulfillment and respect for the other person before my dread of being alone in a relationship. As I move forward, the scars from this experience remain. But they are a testament to my resilience. They remind me that I have the strength to face difficult truths and make tough decisions, that I deserve to be loved fully and without reservation. The journey of reclaiming the joy and peace I once knew is ongoing, but now I walk it with a clearer vision of who I am, and what I truly value in life and love. I appreciate everyone listening to and reading my story. I have removed it from the platforms where I published it since I believe the details of what he did with me should not reflect poorly on my accounts. The only page I want to share a tale on is this one. Please leave a comment after hearing the story so I know what everyone thinks. I'll probably read it several times over. I want to thank you again for bearing with me as I confessed. Getting over an old breakup with girlfriend has princess syndrome, and now I am married and happily supporting my wife's hobbies. My relationship with my girlfriend began as a friendship during our college years, a period marked by shared classes and mutual friends, though it never ventured beyond casual chats and group hangouts. It was only after she had thrown her graduation cap into the air that our connection took a turn towards something more profound. As the familiarity of our academic surroundings faded, our personal bond found new ground to flourish on. Over the past 5 months, what started as a gentle rekindling of acquaintance has blossomed into a deep and comfortable romance. We've discovered joy in each other's company, finding comfort in shared silences just as much as in our conversations. Our love has the easy rhythm of a long familiar song, yet every day brings a new verse, a little surprise that deepens our connection. From the outset, what set her apart was her distinctive sense of style. She dresses in a way that can best be described as princess fairytale-like, with long frilly skirts and lace blouses dominating her wardrobe. This isn't just an occasional flourish for special occasions. This is her daily attire, except at her workplace. With her striking looks, she carries this style with an effortless grace, and initially, I found it utterly charming. However, as our relationship has progressed, I've become increasingly aware of how much time and effort she dedicates to maintaining this unique aesthetic. She doesn't just wear these clothes, she lives and breathes this style. She runs a popular blog dedicated to her fashion sensibilities, which garners a significant following. Daily, she's engaged in posting photos, managing links to similar clothing items, and even creating pieces for her Etsy store. Her day often involves hours of sewing and preparing content for her blog. Our outings together often turn into public spectacles. It's not uncommon for people to stare openly, and some even go as far as to take photos of her, thinking they've spotted a character stepped out from a storybook. This level of attention has started to make me feel uncomfortable. I once suggested that perhaps she could tone down her outfits a bit, especially when we are together. In response, she merely opted to leave out accessories like hairpieces, but her overall style remained unchanged. I love her deeply and appreciate her for who she is, but I've also expressed my concerns about how her style might affect the way others perceive her. Her intelligence and kindness are qualities I admire immensely, and I worry these might be overshadowed by her dramatic attire. Despite these talks, she seems to dismiss my concerns, perhaps thinking I'm asking her to change who she is. Her new job, which I hoped might encourage a more conventional style, actually did the opposite. Her boss and colleagues have been incredibly supportive of her unique fashion sense. When my girlfriend landed her new job, I harbored a quiet hope that the professional environment might nudge her towards a more conventional style of dress. Perhaps, I thought, the demands and decorum of the workplace would gently steer her away from her fairy tale-inspired wardrobe to something a bit more mainstream. However, the reality turned out to be quite the opposite. Rather than conforming to the typical office attire, her unique style was met with enthusiasm and encouragement from her new colleagues and boss. Far from being seen as out of place, her distinctive dresses and accessories became a point of fascination and admiration within the office. Her boss, a dynamic woman known for encouraging creativity, praised her for her authenticity and the personal flair she brought to the team. Her colleagues too, often expressed their delight in seeing her daily outfit choices, which they viewed as a breath of fresh air in the sometimes staid office environment. This acceptance and support not only boosted her confidence but also affirmed her belief in personal expression through fashion. It became clear that her style was more than just clothing, it was a fundamental part of her identity that resonated with those around her. The workplace, which I had assumed would demand conformity, instead became a space where her creativity and uniqueness were celebrated, enhancing her sense of belonging and fulfillment at work. This unexpected outcome reminded me of the importance of embracing individuality. It reinforced the idea that personal style and professional success are not mutually exclusive but can indeed enhance one another in a supportive environment. However, navigating this aspect of our relationship has been challenging. I want to be supportive and celebrate her individuality, But I also feel a need to discuss the potential long-term impacts of her choices without coming across as critical or unsupportive. It's a delicate balance, finding a way to communicate my feelings effectively without undermining her expression of self. I'm still figuring out how best to approach this conversation, hoping to find a way that respects both her style and my concerns. How can I talk to her about dressing more appropriately without hurting her feelings? Update 1. I didn't plan on updating, but things changed. I've had a lot to process and reckon with, emotionally and personally. I'd been grappling with my thoughts about how to approach my girlfriend about her dressing style, intending to strike a balance between supporting her uniqueness and feeling more at ease in public together. However, life threw a curveball before I could broach the subject. Last week, out of the blue, she called me after work, asking if she could stop by my place. I agreed, thinking perhaps we could enjoy a relaxed evening and maybe even discuss my thoughts over dinner. But the moment she arrived, I sensed something was off. She declined my offer to cook dinner, saying instead that we needed to have a serious conversation. Half jokingly, I asked if she was breaking up with me, and the look of guilt that flashed across her face said it all before she even spoke. She explained that she felt we were at different stages in our lives, wanting different things for our futures. During that conversation, she sat across from me at our favorite little cafe, the one with the quirky art on the walls and the mismatched chairs that somehow added charm to our usual meetups. As she spoke, her voice was calm, almost rehearsed, as if she had gone over this speech multiple times in her head before actually voicing it out loud. I sat there, mostly in silence, nodding occasionally, trying to process the weight of her words. It felt surreal, this stark contrast between the lively ambiance of the cafe and the somber mood at our table. She talked about how she envisioned her future, filled with aspirations and plans that didn't seem to include me. It wasn't about fault or blame, it was just a realization that our paths, once so aligned, were now diverging. I remember watching her, the way her hands moved animatedly as she explained her need for change, how important it was for her to follow her dreams, which now required her to move to a new city. The realization that we were breaking up sank in slowly, like a stone gradually making its way to the bottom of a lake. It was my first time being on the receiving end of a breakup. Until then, I'd somehow managed to avoid this particular kind of heartache. I had always heard that breakups were tough, but experiencing it firsthand was a different ordeal altogether. We parted ways that day with a promise to remain friends, a hopeful note and a melody that had turned melancholic. But as I walked away, the emptiness of the promise hung heavy in the air. The suddenness of it all left me reeling. One moment we were planning weekend getaways, and the next, we were saying goodbye. The following days were a blur of emotions, moments of rational understanding interspersed with pangs of loss. It's been rough, to say the least. The loneliness feels more acute at night, and there are moments when I catch myself reaching out to text her about something funny or interesting before reality hits me again. I've been trying to keep busy, to fill the void with hobbies and meetups with friends. But the adjustment is a work in progress, a journey of relearning how to be just me again, without the us that had become so integral to my identity. The breakup, as gentle and as reasoned as it was, marked the end of a chapter. But the suddenness of it left me reeling. It was my first experience being on the receiving end of a breakup, and frankly, it's been rough. Therefore, amidst the turbulence of emotions, there's a burgeoning sense of personal growth, an understanding that sometimes, loving someone means letting them go. And so, as I forge ahead, there's a part of me that's thankful for the shared memories and hopeful for what the future holds. For both of us. Specifically with social media at play, navigating the fallout has been especially difficult. I noticed a surge of interactions on her profile as soon as her relationship status changed. All these alternative-looking guys have been liking her posts and commenting on her pictures. They've been liking her posts and leaving comments, and it stings to see. I know it's probably nothing serious. I don't think she's seeing these guys, but it still hurts. Each notification I saw felt like a small jab. While I know logically that social media interactions are often superficial and don't necessarily signify anything deeper, the speed and intensity of their engagement stung. It was hard not to feel replaced or overlooked, as though our past moments together could be quickly overshadowed by a few well-placed likes and comments. I tried to reassure myself with the situation. These guys were likely just friends and admirers from her blogging community who felt more at liberty to express themselves now that she was publicly single. Yet knowing this didn't alleviate the discomfort. Watching this unfold felt like observing a part of her life where I no longer had a place or say. It was a clear, if unintended, signal that our chapter had closed, and new ones were beginning for her, ones in which I had no role. This surge in online interactions highlighted how different our worlds were, despite the time we shared. Her world, vibrant and constantly on display, contrasts sharply with my more reserved private nature. It's a difference that perhaps I hadn't fully appreciated, until seeing the ease with which her community rallied around her newfound singleness. The rational part of me knows that this shouldn't be taken to heart, that social media is just a facade and doesn't always reflect the complexities of real life. It serves as a constant reminder of what was, and what has now changed. As I continue to grapple with these feelings, I find myself needing to step back from online spaces at times to protect my emotional well-being, reminding myself to focus on personal healing rather than lingering over what appears on a screen. Amidst dealing with my feelings, a friend of mine has been trying to cheer me up and even suggested setting me up on a date. He thinks it might help me move on, introduce a bit of normalcy, or at least distraction. But I'm broken. Part of me thinks it could be a good distraction, yet another part feels unready to step into the dating world again so soon. It feels like I'd just be going through the motions, not really present or fair to the person I'd be meeting. This whole situation has made me more introspective about what I need right now. Perhaps I should focus on healing and redefining my own goals before jumping back into dating. It's a confusing time, trying to discern between moving on and giving myself the space to recover from a relationship that I wasn't ready to end. As for my friend's suggestion, I appreciate his intentions, but I think I might need a little more time to just be on my own, reflect on my past relationship, and rebuild my emotional resilience. Update 2. Stumbling upon an old email account can feel like opening a time capsule. That's exactly what happened to me recently. I hadn't accessed this particular email in nearly a decade, and I was genuinely surprised that I could still log in. But what caught me off guard even more were the comments that awaited me, reminders of a life in the past, including notes from friends and, more poignantly, traces of an old breakup that had once seemed like the end of the world. It's a bit surreal, and admittedly somewhat embarrassing, to revisit those moments now. The breakup that dominated my thoughts and feelings back then feels like a distant echo today. At the time, being dumped was a major blow to my ego and emotions. Looking back, it's clear that our relationship wasn't destined to last, and my reaction was more about the sting of rejection than the actual loss of what we had. Fast forward to today. I'm 33 years old, and life has taken a beautifully different turn. I'm married to an incredible woman who is 31, and we've been building our lives together for the past 4 years. From her, I've learned valuable lessons about the importance of genuinely supporting each other's passions. She has a deep love for running and baking, activities that bring her joy and fulfillment, which I wholeheartedly encourage. We also have a delightful daughter who's about to turn 3. Raising her has expanded my understanding of freedom and expression. I am committed to ensuring my daughter grows up knowing she can explore her interests safely and without restraint. I want her to be free to express herself however she likes, as long as it is safe. I would do anything for my wife and daughter. Interestingly, I've maintained a distant but amicable connection with my ex via social media. We don't engage in conversations, but we keep up with each other's lives through occasional likes. She has since moved on and is happily married to another woman. They both embrace a unique dress style that's quite distinctive, though less intense than her previous fairy tale princess attire. Their photos, often set against the rustic backdrop of their farm, bring to mind scenes from Anne of Green Gables. It's heartwarming to see her looking so content and at peace in her current life. This journey from heartache to happiness has taught me a lot about myself and about relationships. My early 20s were marked by immaturity and a lack of understanding about what it means to be truly supportive. Experiencing that breakup, painful as it was, helped me grow and prepared me to be a better partner in my marriage. It underscored the importance of respecting and celebrating my partner's interests as integral parts of who they are. My objectives and viewpoints have changed dramatically now that I have a family of my own. The dramas that used to seem so overwhelming now look like stepping stones that helped me get to where I am now, which is a position of greater understanding and appreciation for the complexities of life. My true love is the easygoing pace of our family life, my wife's pastimes, and my daughter's future pursuits. In essence, rediscovering that old email account didn't just remind me of who I used to be, it highlighted how far I've come. It served as a reflection on personal growth and the beauty of moving forward, a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit, and the endless capacity for change and happiness that we all possess.